Hey guys, it's Chris Coleman at Stokes, Charlotte. Just wanted to call and congratulate you and wish you a very, very happy first birthday. Pretty soon you'll be walking and making poop in the potty and maybe learning some actual words so we can have deep, meaningful conversations. I mean, how cool would that be, right?
Hello, this is Craig Rogers, the shepherd of Border Springs Farm in Lamstock. Congratulations on your 1-year anniversary of your fabulous podcast. Thank you so much for making our food and beverage community look so fun, and thank you for spreading the good word.
Hello, this is Gary Crunkleton. Congratulations on North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast, turning 1 year old. You both have faces that are perfect for podcasts.
Hey, this is Steve Mangano from the Curiate app, a guest and also a supporter and sponsor of the NCF&B podcast. Congratulations, Max and Matt. Really excited for your 1 year, and it's been amazing listening to the great stories of our NC food and beverage community.
Hey, Max and Matt. It's Jacob from Snappy on the Run. Happy holidays and congrats on an amazing first year. Can't wait to see what you guys got planned for 2018. Bye.
Hey, it's Clark at Heirloom. I just wanted to call and say congrats on the 1 year of the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. You guys are doing an absolutely fantastic job, and I can't wait to see you both again, hopefully back at Lamstock. We'll have some more fun drinks in an RV and have a good party.
This is Anya Zerbastello from Scarborough Brewing Company and On Square saying congratulations on the 1 year producing the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. We all love it.
Hey guys, it's Mike from Incision in Cocoa. Big congrats on your 1 year anniversary with the podcast. You guys are amazing and wish you all some future. Have a kick-ass holidays and best of luck in 2018 and beyond.
This is Matty B of episode 10, The Cider Show. I can't believe it's been a year. It's absolutely amazing. I started looking through the list of shows to talk about all of the ones that I liked and realized that it would take me forever to be able to do that. You guys have an unbelievable list of people that you've interviewed. It's been informative for me. It's always good to hear my friends, but I've learned of new people and made new connections just based on the NC F&B podcast. So thank you guys for doing this. Thanks for keeping us all abreast of what's new and hot, as well as what's old and amazing. Here's to another year. Take care, guys.
You're listening to the NCF&B podcast. Tell your friends to find us on iTunes at NCF&B podcast. And remember, the ampersand is simply shift the number 7 on your keyboard. And share our website, ncfbpodcast.com. There you'll find pictures, show notes between shows, and links to content where we've discussed on each episode. And follow us on Twitter and Instagram at NCFBpod. This show is sponsored by Food Scene. That's food-seen.com. Providing professional photography, social media management, website design, and graphic design services for the food and beverage industries of North Carolina. Foodscene.com. And now, enjoy the show.
Well, hello, and thank you for listening to the NCF&B podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And we have quite the deal for you today. We have a chef, a business owner of 3 different restaurants around the Triangle, and also a sommelier, all in one package, Mr. Charlie Deal.
Hey guys, how you all doing?
And a proud beer
And this is I thought this was actually going to be called Guys with Beards Talking About Wine.
We're going to record that section later.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah. It's a whole different intro I have for you.
Perfect.
So, Charlie, thank you for coming on in, or thanks for letting us come here to Jujube out in Chapel Hill. This is fantastic. I've been around this neighborhood so many different times, and I finally found this place. I've eaten at a few of your restaurants, and this was the last to fit the triangle.
Ironic, because it was the first of the 3.
Right. So you established this place in 2005, is that right?
Right. So this coming December will be our 12th year, December 19th.
were you in the kitchen at that time?
I was. So of the 3 restaurants, this is the one that I was actually from day one the opening chef, and I was the opening chef working most nights until about November of 2006 when I hired Josh DeCarlos, who's actually now
Mothers and Sons.
Skinny.
Yeah, exactly. So
he was Flacco.
Yeah, exactly. So he brought. He came down from Connecticut, and that was his first job in the area. So he worked with me and then helped me open up Dos Perros. So he was with me until he went to go work for Matt at Mateo when they opened that up.
Nice. Okay, so to set the scene here, you opened this place in 2005.
Right.
You moved to the Triangle in about 02, I think.
Yes, 02, September 02.
And you're from Santa Cruz.
Right.
You're a banana slug.
Well, I didn't go to school there.
Right, but if you're from Santa Cruz, you're a banana slug.
I actually went to UC Berkeley, so.
So you're a Golden Bear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, mine didn't graduate, but.
Sorry about Aaron Rodgers, man.
Yeah, it's tough.
That's a tough one. No, I spent many a time in Berkeley. I'm from San Jose. I don't know. I think we maybe.
Well, I'm from Sunnyvale originally,
so
not too. And San Jose was sort of one of the things that was the genesis for a lot of the menu items here was the fact that so often we'd end up in San Jose in the Vietnamese part of town. I think San Jose is probably is like one of the strongest Vietnamese cuisine communities in the country. I mean, there's literally whole malls dedicated to so there'll be Story McLaughlin.
Yeah.
Is there's 4 malls, one on each corner, each of the Great Fuss Shop and a Great Banh Mi store, and
I just thought that was commonplace growing up, and then when I moved to Los Angeles, still a nice melting pot, but the Vietnamese food was not nearly as intense as it is up in San Jose. Sunnyvale, that's where my mom works. But
I can't believe you guys have never discussed this
mentioned
before.
it somewhere, but yeah, I know.
I think we talked about the California connection. We didn't actually realize how
we were that close.
Right.
Yeah, so Santa Cruz, for anyone that doesn't realize, Santa Cruz and San Jose, it's like the distance of driving from Raleigh to Chapel Hill.
Right.
It's about that distance, but you go up, and so you were a hill man, though. Santa Cruz has beautiful hills, and then you're right on the coast.
Right.
So most people think laid back surfer stoner area. That's typically like the hippie land, more than any place I would say in California. So
it's
what was happening
mostly
in this
true
life?
Actually. Interesting growing up there though, because there's definitely 2 Santa Cruzes, because there's and this was, mind you, I was there in the 80s, and this moved to Santa Cruz from the South Bay in 82. And so it was just kind of becoming that, but there was this weird cultural transition between the old Santa Cruz, which was actually quite conservative.
Yeah.
Because and then the new Santa Cruz, which was sort of burgeoning as a result of the university.
I think it was because Lost Boys was filmed there, and from that point on, never the same.
Yeah. So
vampire and Vietnamese cuisine.
Yeah.
I've already gotten both in. What was the over/under on getting vampires and Vietnamese cuisine?
I think it was 3-1 or something like that.
I had it at 5 minutes, so I think the under.
We're in.
Yeah, nice, excellent. No, but seriously, so there's 2 different Santa Cruzes. So which one did you fall in?
Well, I mean, kind of smack dab in the middle. I was just going to high school there. It's everyone, we were the kids of parents who weren't necessarily hippies.
Yeah.
A lot of them had been there 3rd generation Santa Cruz, and one of my friends' great grandfather was the first sheriff of Soquel, which is the next town over from Santa Cruz. And
but that's what makes a good hippie. You don't want to have hippie parents, because then you have no one to be a hippie against.
Exactly. True.
Yeah, you need conservative parents to fulfill your hippiness.
That's more of a rebel than a hippie, though.
No, but it's both. I think because the thing about it is, if your parents are hippies, you rebel and you become conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so your parents were neither.
My parents
smacking.
But I think I became kind of sort of a hippie.
Yeah. Okay.
I
mean, you were running restaurants out of your apartment and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So, and you went to Cal Berkeley in the 80s.
My indoctrination was complete.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Were you at Harrison Hall by any chance?
I would not. Harrison Hall.
It was a dorm.
No, I forget. I was in Norton Hall.
Norton. Oh yeah, I think that was right across from.
Might have been one of the. There's 4 in each little.
I partied a lot at Cal Berkeley. Didn't study, but partied there.
That's kind of why I didn't last there long.
Yeah, it's a fun place to party. But yeah, so as Matt just said, let's get into this. You were doing pop-up dinners out of your apartment in Berkeley. Is that correct?
Actually in Oakland.
In Oakland, which is essentially the same thing.
It was part of Oakland, for
Yeah.
sure. And so I was in Rockridge, so I was working I was actually working in Berkeley, living in Berkeley, but I had a good friend of mine who I worked with at a restaurant. We met at a restaurant called Paloma, and and we started running. I'm sorry, backing up a little bit. I did start actually in Berkeley in my apartment, and that was Smilin' Chucker's Country Kitchen.
Right.
And it was basically everyone sat on the floor and ate whatever I made, and then that actually got me the job, because I was always a busboy / waiter prior to that. And that got me a job as a cook in the new restaurant Paloma that just opened up, where I met this guy Bernard Engert, who ended up being one of the partners in my first true restaurant in Santa Cruz. And he was a great waiter. He'd worked at Commander's Palace and Michael's of Santa Monica and whatnot, so he had that whole thing. So then, and he lived in a nicer house in Rockridge, which is a part of Oakland, and so we started doing the Heaven Shack, which was the sort of the upscale version where everyone actually sat in tables and chairs and were waited on by a really good waiter. And we did the same.
And you charged people like they had to pay cash at the door?
It was suggested donation.
Oh, gotcha.
But everyone paid what the suggested donation was. 'Cause, I mean, we couldn't necessarily. It was kind of funny. Our joke was like it was our goal to get shut down. Like it was our goal to get big enough that that the man had to come in and like stop us.
Well,
there's a line outside your restaurant or your apartment door, and cops are like, "What the heck's going on here?"
Exactly.
That's it's like infamy, but there have been a few startups that kind of happened that way. I mean. This reminds me of USC and Paladar. If you've ever seen the documentary on Paladar, are you familiar?
No.
These guys were doing very high-end cuisine out of their dorm rooms, and they were charging $300-400 a plate, and people would come in and lines and tickets like way in advance. Check it out. It's streaming on Netflix.
Nice. There was actually a kid at Duke, Brian Zupon, who was doing the same thing out of his apartment, and he was doing molecular gastronomy. This was back when Jujube was relatively new, so I'm guessing it was like 07, 08.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was eGullet or Chowhound or something like that, I kind of came across him, and I reached out to him because I was like, hey man, I used to do this myself. And so we had a bit of a kindred spirit, and I actually used to source, like he'd like, hey, I need some pork cheek or something like that. So I'd source stuff that he couldn't get at the store.
Nice.
Because I was just like, and so he and I became friends. He actually ended up, at least last I saw, he was not working in culinary fields. He's smart enough to find a real job.
He did something else.
So what kind of cuisine were you doing out in?
It was all vegetarian, actually.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was, and a lot of it was grown actually. When the Heaven Shack happened, it was all actually grown there, or not all of it, but a lot of it was grown there.
Was it vegetarian because that was just like economically sustainable, so to speak?
Not necessarily. I was for a brief time. I was a vegetarian, and one of the things that sort of what that year or so that I spent as vegetarian, I learned that everybody sort of short arms the vegetarian in the restaurants.
Yeah.
You know, like you go to an otherwise nice and creative restaurant, and then like the vegetarian plate is like all the garnishes from the other dishes.
Right.
You know, and I was like, well, that's kind of stupid. And so I thought it'd be a nice niche to like take food seriously from a vegetarian standpoint, and develop 5 core. And the other thing about it is I also recognize that the easiest way because if you try and stick with the construct of like the triangle plate of the meat, grain, vegetable thing, right, and you take the meat away, you either have to replace that with some sort of mock meat, mm-hmm, or you have these linear dishes. Because there's just like grain and vegetable, and so I realized the best way to solve that issue is to stack up 5 courses of linear dishes that somehow eventually get the job done. Like it's not as easy to get the job done in one plate.
Sure, mm-hmm, but you could get the sustenance from one and then the heartiness from another. Yeah.
Exactly. So by the time you're done with this 5-course meal, you could stack up a number of linear dishes and yet it'd be complete.
Well, why would it need to be a mock meat, like not a legit? I mean, are you saying tofu or tempeh? Well, it's like a mock meat, or
no? Yeah, I mean, so that's
essentially your main protein source.
Right. Exactly. And the curious thing about that also is that when you you think of tofu the way they do in China, it's actually not like this meat substitute. In fact, they actually often put tofu, and like mapa tofu is like the Sichuan tofu dish. It's a tofu dish that actually has ham in it.
Right.
So they don't. So it's just a thing.
Yeah.
It's not this, and it's often built out of economic necessity. Like it's cheaper to feed yourself protein that way, and then you season with pork. But I don't know where I'm even going with this, but there's
that's how you expand upon your vegetarian dinner and make it
and fill out the plate and try and, because all of a sudden also that same period of time when I was not eating meat, I was worrying about like, are the beans delicious? Are they, are the greens delicious? I used to came up with some sort of cool little stunts. Like I was able to make a vegetarian version of French onion soup, which is usually beef broth, by roasting the vegetables for the broth and adding Sichuan black beans, which have this like umami that you kind of get like from a beef stock, and then using that as your stock, an otherwise vegetarian dish that's not quite as good if it's not made with beef stock was actually delicious that way.
And you were doing all this at the Hevachak?
Yes.
Nice. All right. Even back further, so you went to school originally you were studying genetic engineering, is that right? Nice. And then, so is that just you were waiting I know your mom kind of influenced you in the culinary arts.
Well, actually, both my parents were good cooks. Neither were professional.
Okay.
My dad was, and my parents were divorced when I was 6. So, regardless of whose house I was at, my dad did the cooking at that house, and my mom did the cooking at her house. And my dad was the one who was like, "Hey, Dad, what time's dinner gonna be ready?" And it was like 6:04, and at like 6:04, it was like boom, it was all ready, and it was not usually that necessarily creative, but it was always. Like the pork chops were cooked just right, and the potatoes are everything on time and correct.
Is your dad an Army guy or something?
No. I mean, he was in the Air Force briefly, but like in his generation, like everyone spent some time in the military.
You're right.
But that didn't really drive his
timeliness.
Okay. And my mother was a bit more of like always being creative, and there was hits and misses more so with hers, but yet there was this notion of...
She was the Barry Sanders of the kitchen.
Exactly, right. Sometimes 5 yard loss, a 60-yard run.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be willing to bet on Mom's cooking on that one, though.
Yeah, no, she was a good cook.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, okay, so then I know there's some famous stories about you being a busboy that might have influenced your career. I don't know if you want to talk about that on the podcast, but and expanded your career. You looking at this like you don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, I used to carry 30 wine glasses in one hand, but
that's not what I'm talking about.
No, we're not. That had nothing to do with anything.
Okay, you did talk about that.
I did talk about that at a Monty.
Yeah,
that neither influenced me positively or negatively towards the career.
For those that don't know, there's a famous story about Charlie getting propositioned by a nondescript lady while you were a busboy at the Dakota back in the day.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And that influenced your life.
Okay, just
from there on.
I got paid to lose my virginity.
Yeah. I mean, how many guys can say that? That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, there's the quote of the night.
Yeah.
You told me when I had a good one to look right at the camera.
That's right.
There you go.
There you go. All right. So,
how much money did you get paid? That's
$100.
So your virginity was worth $100.
Yeah. I don't know whether she would say that now.
Like she had to pay at the end?
No, she paid first. Yeah, it's a long and twisted story.
Maybe 25 back.
Wow. I mean, as I mentioned in the story, I think the prospect of deflowering a young man probably sounds more interesting than it actually is.
Sure.
In real life, most of us are probably not on our game at that point. Then first go around.
Yeah. How old are you? How old were you then?
I was 19.
19. Yeah. Wow. So okay, well then you maybe refer back to that as you please in terms of how that influenced your life, but
or not.
We partnered up with Triangle Wine Company because these guys are awesome. They offer weekly wine tasting events, a wide range of wine and beers from around the world, and an easy online store to find the wines that you'd like. They also offer pickup, local delivery, and shipping. We even set up a promo code NCFB so you can receive 10% off all future purchases.
Go to trianglewineco.com or one of their 3 locations, and for $99, pick up the NCFNB 6-pack, which includes 3 white wines, 3 red wines, and we threw an official NCFNB hat in the bag.
So once again, buy your wine online or in-store at the Triangle Wine Company and use our promo code NCFB during checkout to receive 10% off your future wine and beer purchases. Go to trianglewineco.com or click the top of our website at ncfbpodcast.com.
You came here to the Triangle in 2002.
Right.
Kind of looking maybe just
as a
for
man,
a move.
As a man from this point on.
Yeah.
I'm a grown man at this point.
Yeah. and you're kind of looking to move here, maybe, or
Well,
you were just
we were
looking to
actually.
visit?
So I was married to a woman at the time who I married in Santa Cruz, and we were at a point we wanted to buy a house because we were 30-ish, and that really wasn't going to be possible where we lived because houses. That was like kind of right in the middle of the big housing bubble thing.
Yeah.
Which never actually, it kind of burst and then it sort of picked up right where it left off over there. And so we kind of just sort of took an analytical approach to where we might want to go, and the data sort of pointed towards this as being a pretty cool place to, the measurables were there. I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I actually quantified everything I possibly could and said, and wanted to do an impartial, because after we thought about like all the places we first thought about, we're like, we can't afford to live there any more than we can live here,
Yeah.
So then, and then we came out here and checked out the scene, and actually had dinner at Nana's, and had dinner at Elaine's. Actually, I sent my resume out as sort of like, hey, I'm moving here, and Brett from Elaine's was one of the few people who actually wrote back and said, hey man, why don't you come in for dinner? And this was like, he wasn't like going to hire me necessarily.
Being hospitable.
And so we had dinner there and caught a Bulls game, and it was like May, so the weather was perfect.
Yeah.
Like, this is wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was actually working at the time as a private chef for a couple just outside of Santa Cruz. And so my wife came out here ahead of me and found a job. And then I stayed on with my job through the summer. And then I moved out here on actually September 11th, 2002. So 1 year.
Oh, wow.
It was like 1 year after the big one.
And so you weren't intentional. So all the things were adding up. It wasn't intentional to start a business, or was that?
Not necessarily. No, I first worked for the Fowlers store downtown Durham, and then I got a job at Empire Distributors working in wholesale wine.
Oh, so there's a background to the wine beyond the.
Well, the background goes beyond that. Actually, I mean, I was into the wine thing back in.
Like one of your servers at Oliveto was into wine and would.
Right. We actually, that's when I kind of started working at Oliveto. That's where Bernard and Bernard, the Heaven Shack thing got me a gig at Oliveto where Bernard was working at the point.
Bernard is the guy that worked at Commander's and that worked at
Michael's.
Yeah.
And then so he and I ended up working together at Oliveto. That was probably the most important restaurant that I worked at as far as where I grew as a chef, because the food there was amazing and everyone was so dedicated. We would often, on our days off, we would cook, and we could, the chef let us buy really neat product from the restaurant, so we could get access to cool stuff. This one friend of mine, Perry, was very much into wine. He kind of got me into wine, and we all, after work, because we lived right on the street from there, so we'd have to come after work and we'd pull corks on wines that a kid my age had no business, drinking. Like I remember I joked right before I started working there, everybody had gotten there, everyone had ordered a case of 85 Bollinger Grandonnay champagne, and so all of a sudden everyone I knew had a case of this stuff.
Wow.
So every party we'd go to, we'd be drinking this stuff, and I was joking. At this point I'm like 23, 24, and I was like, my God, I've probably had Bollinger Grandonnay 85 like 15 times now, and I'm wondering how many people outside the Bollinger family have actually had that same wine that many times.
Or outside of James Bond.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Right. And so I remember our living room had all the trophies up on the high upper end wainscot.
The dead soldiers.
We were drinking really cool stuff.
Were you buying wine through the restaurant as well?
Well, yeah, and or through the wine shop downstairs.
Okay.
And but
that wine rep must have been happy.
Yeah.
Like, man, this restaurant moves to Bali and they move all types of stuff.
Exactly. But the few that sort of stuck out, 83 Gamay Côte Rôtie was a gateway. 85 Domaine Tempier La Migua Bandol was the gateway.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And 86 Chateau de Pierre Sauvignon.
So just to give a frame of reference, 83 Gamay, you were drinking that when? This is
91, 92. So it was not like super
crazy old, but
right.
Nice.
And that was actually like bought it right off the shelf at Paul Marcus Wine. So I mean that was like current vintage at the point.
That's insane.
Oh, you hear that all the time. Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Mouton was being sold for $4 to $12 for so many years.
There was actually a story of a friend of mine's father said that when he was back in 1964. We went to a grocery store and they had Chateau Margaux for $11, and we got to go to the counter. They said, "Oh, that's got to be a misprint. It must be $1.10." And so he's like, "Okay, I'll take a case."
and now it's
because there's no freaking
$5,000.
way that a wine could cost $11. Like that was just absurd. Like,
Wow.
Nothing costed that much.
Margot for
but did he
$1.10.
but did he hold on to it, or
I think he did. Yeah.
Yeah,
see, that's
And
the
it-
key.
because that would be worth 10 to 30 times that now. Yeah.
Easily.
But well, yeah. I mean, people are probably wondering why we have wine in front of us and we're not touching it or drinking it. But
Yeah, let's touch and drink it.
But
So this-
but as I mentioned at the top, you are a sommelier and recently certified sommelier.
This year.
Yeah, which is interesting to me because you've been a chef for a long time. You've opened 3 restaurants. Obviously, you've mentioned that wine has been important to you all along. But I appreciate at your ripe old age that your education didn't stop. Most people, you know what you know, and then you incrementally learn things. But you have taken it really serious in the wine game, and a lot of chefs I know, they're like, I know wine, and I'm happy with my wine knowledge, but that's where it lies. I'm a chef. But you have taken your experience even further to become a sommelier. So,
Well, I mean,
interesting.
I was the wine buyer for Jujube, and since it began, and I was the wine buyer for a number of restaurants prior to that. I was essentially the wine buyer for Oswald, which was the first restaurant opened in Santa Cruz.
Right.
And then prior to that, I was the wine buyer at Globus Noodle in Ketchum, Idaho, which was my first head chef position.
Oh yeah, in Sun Valley.
In Sun Valley,
We
exactly.
got to talk about how you got out there, but continue,
Or-
please.
or not.
It's really not that interesting. I'm not trying to hide it. This is not
I
like
have a great
but-
culinary story of being in Sun Valley, Idaho, but that's for another time.
Anyway, so it wasn't so actually endeavoring into wine professionally, that was not new. But I think that I found that I was kind of mailing it in at a point, and I realized that like my tasting notes were getting really boring. Like they would literally just be like, "Fuck me, that's good," or something like that. And I was like, well, gosh, that's not really very professional. And so I wanted to sort of, it's like if you stop learning, then you kind of start dying.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of endeavor to think more about my craft because I'd already sort of stepped away from the kitchen by and large. From the standpoint of cooking now, besides just at home, I still consult on the menu, and when we do wine dinners, I actually get back in there and I actually make the food on that night.
Okay.
But that's pretty much it. And so, I sort of transitioned into true back of the house, like office stuff, and then the wine was my only like sort of creative element. And so I realized, a lot of guys question why I did it because usually it's like a resume builder, and obviously my resume, like
you don't need a resume.
I
builder
hire
at this point,
myself.
yeah.
But what it did though is it got me thinking about wine. The blind tasting thing got me evaluating wine through new eyes. Like recognizing A, is this delicious, and B, is this doing what it's supposed to do? And which it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Like I think that sometimes the downside to the fascination with sommeliers and blind tasting is that every wine is now graded against whether it's typical, and that which is I think a dangerous thing because we don't necessarily need to have like the judge of a good wine shouldn't be can you tell what it is if I don't tell you what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are only happening within the parameters of the court of master sommeliers or blind tasting.
Right, but because more people are fascinated with that court,
Yeah.
that is translating to to the general. I mean, maybe it's just my blinder because I
Yeah, do you see that? I mean, with consumers, with your guests?
not necessarily so
Okay.
much, but I'm afraid that also our market is we're not in New York, we're not in San Francisco,
Yeah.
like where. I mean, there's a lot. So, like, we're living a different reality in terms of wine than those cities are, anyways. Like, from what people want, what sells. I mean, hell, this Beaujolais, for instance. I mean, Beaujolais has been, along with Riesling, probably been a Somme darling for a decade now. But
At least
the needle hasn't moved on either of those grapes around here.
I also have to say, though, we're in Chapel Hill right now, which is pretty traditional when it comes to wine, right?
It's more traditional than Durham. I find
Yeah.
like what sells here is not quite what sells at Juju.
Yeah, and then there's also pockets of Raleigh, and we've talked about on the show before, like when Max was at Standard Foods and we were doing the wine list there, like the more esoteric, the better. if it was different, people wanted it. People wanted to get away from anything that was mainstream or traditional. Like,
which you know, when we were at Cafe Del Rey in Los Angeles, you would think that's a progressive, well-educated, wine-centric area, but all we did is sell Rombauer Chardonnay.
Yeah.
It's like, that's, so it just depends on, I think, the
little
space.
pocket you're in.
yeah, exactly. I think there's different pockets that.
But I do know this though, is that like my I hear it from my reps though too, like
Right.
who are selling to the Triangle at large, and for every standard foods that they want Jura and orange wine or whatever they want, like that's still like the very vocal minority,
Right.
and so there, which is the one cool thing about that as a consumer, because I'm still a consumer,
Right.
very much so. And the cool thing for me is that I've often thought about it's easier to find great wine in a B market than it is in an A market, because while New York City might get 10 times as much of the cool stuff that we get, there's 100 times more people who want it. So it slips
And it's priced appropriately, too.
and it slips through the cracks here, so for what I want as far as for myself, whether I can sell it here at the restaurant is a different story entirely, but for my own purposes, I'm like, yeah, sure, send it to me. And so these wines end up on closeout lists, and actually that's what I build a lot of the vintage breadth of our list on closeout lists because of the fact that, well, it had to have been in their warehouse for a while for it to make the closeout list, so it's a couple of vintages old, and I don't have room to store that kind of wine for, nor do I have like the economic parameters to afford the kind of inventory that it would take to keep vintage breadth alive. But by combing those lists every time I get them and basically stopping whatever I'm doing when that email comes across, and then looking like, all right, and then say I want that.
Yeah.
And
it's such a rarity, though, even to do that. I mean, amongst buyers and amongst people who are, unless you're building like a award-winning list, like a Wine Spectator Grand Award, that people actually have vintage breath on their lists.
Well, we
or
actually
care
have
about that.
I mean, for our list, which is basically almost exactly 100 bottles, which is puts us in the small category. I guess, at least when I just submitted our list to World of Fine Wine for. To kind of try and get an award, and that put us actually one bottle of. I had 101 wines, and if I had 100 or less, it'd be a micro list. As it was, I was merely a small list.
Okay.
The smallest of the small list, apparently, but the thing about
it's like being in the wrong tax bracket because you make like $1 over the minimum. It's like I'm getting shit on. Yeah.
But for a list that are modestly sized that it is, I'm pretty proud of the vintage depth that we have. At one point I counted about the number of wines that were 2010 or earlier, which is not like ancient, but it's still like a lot of them are entering a wheelhouse of drinking, and we had like 35 wines or so
that were before 2010
or 2010 or earlier. Yeah.
So that's interesting also, and I love this conversation. I know Max and I, we wanted to talk about the art of writing a short list, but I find it that same thing akin to drinking esoteric wines or atypical wines, that in the USA, more traditional markets, we infanticide wines.
Right.
We drink them before it's time.
We drink them as babies. And so, like, do people look at that and be like, dude, why do you still have 2010s on your list? Like, I just bought 2016 at the store,
I don't. I mean, I think that by and large, people. I mean. They go for it, and we had, for instance, like I just sold the last bottle of an 09 Valpolicella Ripasso that we had. That was, again, that's probably 4 or 5 vintages old.
Wow!
But I found it on the closeout list, and I bought. And the downside about that is that, well, call it a downside if you want. When you get one of those, you usually got to fire one open, because unlike the majority of the wine that I buy, where something shows me like, you like this wine? Yeah, I like this wine. Give me this wine. It's like you know exactly what it tastes like.
You're not tasting the closeout list wines.
Right.
Yeah, you're not sampling.
But you do in a case like that, because there's an outside chance that it was garbage. That was maybe why it ended up. It turned out it was marvelous, and it's not the kind. And because it's not a upper tier wine, it's not the Amarone. It's only the Valpolicella Ripasso. The thought of it's the last wine you'd expect to drink a little bit old. Although that's, I mean,
I know your point. You're expecting those wines to be the young consumed ones. Yeah.
Although that wine in particular that theory doesn't hold for, I'm sort of talking from the abstract. And I actually, one of the things about, one of my favorite things to do is, and I learned this back when I was poor and trying to buy wine, is like buying second and third tier Rhones and aging those for a while, especially in great vintages. My line is always bottom feed the great Rhone vintages.
You mean like Vacurage?
Yeah, or even Côte Rhone Village, like just like. Really? And if it's a great vintage, I think that the gap sort of narrows between, like, in a marginal vintage, then the great wines are still good, and the lower wines are often not that good at all.
Right.
And in an average year, the great wines are still, they definitely outpace but in a great year, especially in an area like the Rhone, you see it in the scores. Like you see, like La Chapelle gets 95, and then his Croz gets 93, and you're like, and La Chapelle costs $180, and his other one costs 30. Like,
right.
That's a lot. I mean, in mind, he points on everything, but it sort of validates what I was always feeling about the fact that in those great years, it's just everyone made great wine, and so you could slide down the chain a little bit and buy a Croz or a Queyron or a Baccarat or Gigondas and age those out, and they end up tasting just like Chateauneuf or Hermitage.
Yeah.
At some point.
I also think that point works actually the opposite way in crappy vintages, where you can get possibly the top wines. They'll declassify. No, but I'm saying even the top wines, which are variably a steal compared to a great vintage with big scores, because the winemakers are focusing so hard on their top wine to make sure that they're, cutting fruit and getting the best of possible that they can, that you're maybe better off buying an off vintage, in a top wine. I mean,
that drink it in 5 years as opposed to 30.
Well, yeah. But that model I'm talking about goes more into like the Bordeaux for your first wine versus your second wine versus then different villages, because obviously that's a separate conversation. But point being, even in a bad vintages where I feel like the winemaker is going to be hyper focused on getting that top wine to the top.
Right. Absolutely.
He's working harder to make the wine better.
Exactly.
Because he has to.
And the
raw material is not as good.
Exactly. So you're being even that much more selective on your raw material.
It always makes me feel like, would you rather drive the entry-level Mercedes or the high-end Honda?
Mm-hmm.
I would always go that entry-level Mercedes just because it's, and that's that mentality of like, going with the house that's been around for a long time, even in a bad year, or their entry-level wine is still going to be an excellent wine because they have this standard of excellence.
Right.
You always kind of go from there. But so what are we drinking here?
This is a Morgon Côte de Pie from Bontonnet. This is it's 2011, which I brought this out today because I wanted to sort of dispel the myth about. I mean, some people think of Beaujolais as Beaujolais Nouveau, and then it extends from there, of course, and they think it's got to be something you got to drink right away. I was lucky enough to be at a tasting. Thomas Meunier brings this wine in, and he's actually one of the first importers in the area who's brought in all 10 crus. So his portfolio has all 10, and we sat down at a tasting where we tasted all 10 crus. And this one the line between Beaujolais and Burgundy proper was really blurred to the wine like this.
Yeah.
Like it starts tasting like that. Go back to typicity. Like, are you sure you would call that Gamay, or maybe you might call that Pinot because it's got the acid and the structure that it goes beyond what the tutti frutti notion of Gamay typically brings.
I also think that Côte de Pie in particular is an outlier, but it definitely speaks to your point. And I just want to quantify for those that don't maybe know, or just think of Beaujolais Nouveau, or they maybe know Louis Jadot Beaujolais Village, that you have 10 crus, essentially hills or specific places in Beaujolais that make exceptional versions of Beaujolais that are age-worthy and do blur the lines of Burgundy
and
wines.
I think are to this day, despite the fact that there's more hype on them than there ever has been before, they still represent an amazing value in terms of like the quality, to get this level of production, this level of care, this singular nature of this wine. If this was made from Pinot Noir and grown, 25 miles north, this wine would cost 5 times what it costs.
Yeah,
and
because you can get this wine on a shelf for probably between $20 and $30 retail.
Right.
Yeah.
And that gives you an average bottle of Pinot.
Yeah.
Not like, oh my God, this is really, really cool. This is just like fine.
Yeah.
you can get a decent bottle of Pinot for that, or you can get an exceptional Beaujolais. And in this case, where it has depth and character and all the things that make a great Burgundy, it's just made from a different grape and in a different place, and it's not quite as heralded.
And where do you think this went from when it was fresh and new, as opposed to now 6 years later?
I never tasted this wine until this wine was actually, I bought this current vintage from this is what my maybe there's they might it might be out by now, but 6 months ago when I bought this was readily available I couldn't buy a younger vintage if I wanted one.
Oh, so this wasn't a closeout. This was current vintage.
This is current vintage.
But typically, these are going to probably be a little bit more fruity and jammy, like as they're young, right? But even the Côte de Pie, you're saying, is kind of an outlier, that it's a little bit more.
I mean, for Gamay, it does make a super soft version of Gamay and like very round and supple.
So let's talk about Gamay, because that's not a grape that most people talk about in a application form. And I'll ask both of you, like, am I drinking Gamay as like an inexpensive way to get like an alternate route of Pinot Noir, or why would I drink Gamay over something else?
Well, one of the things about Gamay is that it's super versatile. Like one of the things, so when I'll preface this by saying that I probably drink far more white wine than I do red. Mostly because I think white wine pairs to food a lot better than red. Mm-hmm. We actually, years ago when Josh was still working for me, we used to do a 20-course tasting menu at the bar. And at the kitchen bar over there, and so it was, and so
we have a word for that in Yiddish. It's called kenahara.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, pain in the ass.
Well, there's 20, and so it only was limited to 6 people, and they'd often ask me to do pairings, and my first thing was like, I hope you like white wine,
right?
Because I can talk myself into the last, say, 3 savory courses is going with red, but I really can't talk about much before that, and I could easily find a white to go just as easily. But so when I go to a table, and this is often the case, like the thing about food and wine pairing in a restaurant, it's so difficult. It's like you got 4 people, they got 4 different entrees. Like, hey, we'd like to have a wine. You're like, okay, well, who's getting left out of this picture? Because, and short of and reason,
the guy that's not paying, that's who.
Yeah. And I think that from a white wine standpoint, there's a lot that work. Riesling was wonderfully. Chenin Blanc is really versatile. Champagne, of course, goes with everything.
Everything.
Yep.
But as far as a red's concerned,
but nobody thinks about champagne as a food.
No, they don't. They should, especially here with dumplings. Champagne and dumplings are like a match made in heaven. It's a whole. We could do a whole story.
Barbecue chicken, fried chicken,
you name it.
Possibilities are endless.
Yeah. And but for a red wine, Beaujolais, because it has the levity that doesn't obliterate a fish dish, it goes. It's probably the best chicken wine there is out there. Like chicken and Beaujolais, like roast chicken and Beaujolais it's almost cliche how like get a chicken and drink some Beaujolais, and so that is my red wine, and we're about to. I mean, Thanksgiving's right around the corner, and that's like a perfect
Gamay season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just so happen. I don't know whether. It just happens that it also coincides with the release of the Beaujolais Nouveau, but it might be sort of coincidental, but it just so happens to be a great wine to drink, with the Nouveau or otherwise. Yeah. With turkey.
No, I think.
And the thing about Thanksgiving also is difficult is that you're not just eating turkey. You're having turkey and sweet potatoes and like this whole myriad of foods. Like, what wine goes with all 10 of these things on your plate? Well, Beaujolais will do it, and Riesling will do it.
Yeah, just to summarize, I think exactly like you said, Gamay, on one sense, in terms of applicability, is for that person who's a huge Burgundy fan but doesn't necessarily have the wallet to drink Burgundy and still get great value. And then secondly, as a red wine pairing that's extremely versatile, it also can be a super mineral driven wine. So somebody who wants that like stone and graphite and granite finish, that's kind of what Gamay is known for.
It's also a red that you can, it's a very sessionable red. Like, like it's one that usually alcohol is not that high on.
This is our 4th bottle.
I'm fine. We're good.
So it's a wine that, from not just from the alcohol standpoint, but just from like the palate fatigue standpoint. Like you can drink a few bottles of Beaujolais and you're not just like, oh god, like what? Like it's just it's not like it's simple. It just doesn't commit. Like you can like doesn't command your attention.
That's what I tell my wife. She's like, "That's your third glass of wine." I'm like, "This is Gamay. It's sessionable. Don't worry about it."
You're palate fatigued.
Not fatigued.
So with the wine list that we were talking to earlier, 101 wines on your menu, which we've now all decided that is, or at least the wine governors have decided that that's a small list.
Right.
And so where would, and also Jujube coming with flavors of Asia. It's kind of like an Asian fusion, dare I say it like that?
Absolutely. No, we said it unapologetically.
Okay, great. And then on top of that, even reading some of your notes that you do, you have a great blog online with your on your website talking about your ideas of wine. Many of it goes towards white wine. A lot of it goes to even sweeter wine. And then you have red. So how many Gamays would make it on a list of 101 wines at an Asian fusion restaurant, and what does your menu kind of evolve to be?
Well, the answer to the Beaujolais question, or Gamay as it were, is there's three. So we have our menu broken up, our wine is broken up into sort of categories, and there's Gamay and Pinot Noir is one category, which has 3 Beaujolais, which happen to be the 3 least expensive wines on that list, and then some New World Pinot Noir, and then a few Burgundies as well, which of course gravitate towards the higher end of the list.
Sure.
So one of the things about so there's always been this notion about reasoning in Asian food, and why, and it was the right answer to the wrong question, because they always talk about spiciness and sugar, and because sugar is it's good it kills the burn. But the thing about it is that not all Asian food is spicy, but a lot of it is sweet. So the sweet wine worked, but not because it was killing the heat, but because it was matching the sugar. Yeah. And so one of the things we've learned over the years is that part of our fusion is actually backing away the sugar a little bit from the dishes, and so they're not quite as sweet. Like if you've ever made pad thai, I made pad thai with a Thai woman once, and I was like, oh my God, that's so much sugar. Like it was, I was like, there's like a half a cup for just 2 of our portions. Jeez. And it was, and the thing about it is that oftentimes the complexity of the flavors bury that sweetness. The same way like a complex wine can bury the alcohol a little bit, and it can seem like, well, it doesn't seem that hot, but it's actually, wow, it's 15.5. Like I never would have guessed that. And so oftentimes you don't.
A lot of complexity to bury 15.5 alcohol.
But you say you've had those wines, though.
Yeah, no, sure.
And okay, how about 14?
Rare, 14.5 maybe more.
And it happens with beers too. Like some high gravity beers, like you can be like, I didn't realize I was drinking an 8% beer, but I was. And I think the same. And so oftentimes, like the food doesn't come off sweet. There's so much going on, and yet your palate knows. Your subconscious knows better, and so it still makes a dry wine insipid next to it because the sugar beats up the. So by backing away from the sugar a little bit, we opened our list up to the point where now we can grab the star anise and be like, ooh, that'd be great with a Syrah, or this kind of things, and without having to worry about is this a New World high alcohol big sugar Syrah, or can I actually get away with a Northern Rhone one that maybe it doesn't have the alcohol and the glycerin to match that sweetness, because we back the sweetness away.
Well, wait, so what you're saying right now, this is kind of genius, and it's almost like playing Wine God, because most somms don't also have the luxury of creating the food menu as well. And so you have this, Asian style cuisine that is many times what you're saying on the sweeter side of things, which inherently then makes it difficult to pair wine.
Right.
So you would, instead of changing the wine they're going to put with it, you change the food. You took the sugar out to make
changing the wine. The wine is what the wine is. Like that's the thing. I mean, years ago when I was,
but most somms think that the cuisine is what the cuisine, and they have to work around it with the wine because they're not making the food. So this is kind of a cool marriage that you were able to massage both sides to make room for the wine.
I guess so. I guess you're right. I mean, so back years ago when I was at Oswald in Santa Cruz and we were starting to do wine dinners there. That same, again, because I was the guy tasting the wine and writing the menu, winemakers there weren't used to somebody actually, back then people was write a menu and they'd say, okay, let's see your wines, we'll stick them in there where they fit.
Yeah.
Which is totally backwards, because the thing about it is that you've got maybe, as a winemaker, your portfolio is 5, 6, 7, 8 wines, and as a chef I've got every dish in the whole world that I can make.
Yeah.
And so why do you start by limiting the thing that's limitless, and then fitting it, as opposed to saying, okay, let's taste these wines, and then work backwards from that, because these are the only wines we get to use. We can't be like, can you change your Pinot and make it bigger?
Yeah.
Like, no,
Right.
this is what the Pinot is, you know. And so, and I was always puzzled, like, and so these guys would say, oh wow, it's so curious you do it this way. I'm like, well, no, it's curious that anyone would do it the other way. Like, why would? And now I think over the years, I'm not saying that I was like that started with me, but I was doing it, I think, before a lot of other people were doing it. Mostly, I think, because of the fact that I was, because it wasn't like get the chef and get the somm in the room together and figure out a menu. It was like that was the same dude.
Yeah, would you tell David Boulay, like, hey, ease back on the salt on this one. I want to put this wine on.
Right, no, of course you wouldn't. But you would have, like, a 3 or 4 or 5 maybe different wines, like, what's going to be the best pairing with this, and you would taste it. But yeah, you're not going to change.
The wine is the variable. The cuisine has always been the same.
Exactly.
That's something, most somms would never have the balls to ask a chef to change the recipe so that it could fit the wine. But
and this has been kind of a slow evolution.
Right.
I mean,
sure.
It wasn't.
No, but that is the unique position that you're in, being a chef and a sommelier, or chef and the wine buyer. Yeah.
Right.
So that begs the other question, and back to also the art of the short list. I guess that dictates how you structure your list then, right? Because usually when you structure a short list, you would say, okay, I'm going to have 10 French wines, I'm going to have 10 California wines, I'm going to have 20 or 10 German wines, or in that scenario. But I guess you wouldn't structure it that. You're just going to find then the best wines that are going to fit the food at that point.
Essentially, I mean, so this was when I first moved here. I went to a chocolate tasting at the old Three Cups, which was Janet Abeltry was a chocolate expert, and she was. There was a Three Cups that was back by where Vilma's curry, the curry place, the Indian place, in right next to where. Behind Kipo, where Kipo's is now, there used to be a little coffee shop there, and we went to this chocolate discussion there. And one thing she said that she sort of resonated with me was that she was sort of defending her short list of chocolates. Like, she didn't have that many chocolates there.
Yeah.
And she was saying, the role of the merchant is not to just buy one of everything and say, here you go, figure it out. Mm-hmm. Like, the role of the merchant is to buy wines, or chocolate in her case, wines in my case, that you're excited about. And so you don't need to necessarily, I think it's sort of intellectually lazy to just be like, I'm going to buy them all.
Right.
Put them on a list.
Go into those Italian wineries that had, or restaurants where their menu is 70 pages long, is like going to a department store to buy clothes. It's like every single type of clothing is there, every single type of wine is there. So what's the point of the somm? What's the point of the designer?
Well, now, I don't want to, like, that, like, I've gotten in trouble on message boards when I've sort of promoted this, because I've always, my theory is your list should be as short as it could possibly be to get what you want to get done.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then someone just said, well, you've just insulted these guys, some of the top somms in the world who are managing these massive, and I said, well, no, theirs should be as short as it can be to accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Right.
And what they want to accomplish is having massive vintage breadth and representing all the classified growths of Bordeaux and whatnot, then so be it.
Yeah.
Like, that's their trip, and they probably have there's some sort of trophied property. They have the financial wherewithal and the space for it, and that's what people go there for.
Sure.
And I'm not disparaging that at all.
Yeah.
What I do find annoying is when I go to a place and I look at the list and they've got and there's redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's 5 or 6 Napa Chardonnays between the price of $35 and $50. I'm like, really? You just need one at like 42, and then you're like, and you've got it covered.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to have one that's at that price point and one that's like higher end for the people who want to do that, that's fine too. But like, you don't need to, like, you're just like, pick one. Like, that's your job. Like,
it just sounds like the somm is just a fan of that type of wine, and so they've tried it enough and said, okay, I'll buy that. Okay, I'll buy that.
Possibly, yeah. But I again, maybe it's born of the fact that I don't have the luxury of the space, but I just don't want to. So my list is built mostly around like trying to like fill holes in what people want with as few as possible, and then it's our job to like then to drive and say, oh, if you're looking like, I want this, and if they don't have that, like, well, what do you have that's like it? And as long as I have something that's like what they want, then I've done my job. And the other thing about it is that it makes it a lot more realistic that my staff can actually get their hands around it.
Yeah.
Because I'm not asking them to memorize the differences between every vintage of Bordeaux. Imagine, like, they just need to. So we can have, when we have wine up, we can discuss and I have some sort of confidence that they can actually grasp what I'm talking about.
Wine up is your pre-shift routine that you do for staff.
Yeah, so this like line up.
Yeah,
line up. Yeah. There you go.
Gotcha.
And so there's an expectation that they can grab it all.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not. Because I have to recognize that smart or as committed as they might be, like, they're maybe going to school and they're trying to. This is not their end game, right? Like they wanted. Their end game is to graduate from college and do what they're going to do, not sell wine for me. They just happen to be doing that right now, and so I need to be realistic about what I can expect them to like. And we've addressed that one way. I've just brought on a new GM and Somm, Christiana Honer, who's really talented local. It's like I was finding yesterday at the blind tasting group when people found out, they're like, "Wow, you got a good
hire."
And I'm like, "Yeah, don't say it too loud. You'll ask for a raise already." But
well, I'm wondering, because we talked a lot about wine, but like we said, you have also obviously designed menus. How does that philosophy work? Is it the same applicability into the back of the house, into designing a food menu?
Yeah, one of the things that helped was one of the restaurants I ran for a while was at Charlie Hong Kong, which is like a little noodle shop in Santa Cruz, and it was tiny. It was 800 square foot. It used to be a hot dog stand, and we were generating, we were doing tons and tons of business off these two walks. And one of the things I learned there was this almost like, you hear about people whose like parents, like I had a friend from Switzerland and his parents lived through World War II, and like back then the mentality of a citizen living during wartime was like this whole, like everything was hyper efficient, right? And obviously this is far less important than living through World War II, but I often refer to it as a wartime mentality as far as like any dish on your menu, regardless of what you think about it, if you don't sell the hell out of it, then it's got to go, because it's taking up space. Like it's taking it's taking up space on your menu. It's taking up space in your kitchen. You're buying a product that's exclusively for that. Unless there's one that you can kind of like by using other byproducts of other dishes, and it just sort of happens on its own. Right. Like you got to remove your ego from it. And like I don't care whether you think it's the coolest dish ever. Like nobody else does. Yeah. So and it doesn't mean that you want to make food that you don't love. But it's the difference between what you think is cool and what you and a bunch of other people think is cool, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like get out of the way, because your fascination with tripe is not being mirrored by the market. Like make it for yourself. Like I love menudo as much as the next guy, but we tried to sell it at Dos Perros. So I'm like, hey, what the hell? We're at a Mexican restaurant, and of course no one wanted it. Yeah. And it just became this hassle, and we're like, all right, well.
How long do you try something like that for to give it the proper attention to
say? It depends. It depends on whether everyone's different that way. Every dish is different, but it usually is.
But like specifically with the tripe, like how long did you run it for?
A few menu cycles until we were.
How long?
I think it's 3 months.
3 months. Okay, so that seems like a fair amount of time. That at that point, if it's not working,
right?
Yeah.
Charlie, I bet you have a very clean and neat house.
Actually, it's
it's
not.
It's a disaster.
No, I am not a tidy person at all.
You just keep a tidy list and a tidy menu.
Right. I think maybe it's like that allows you to be less than tidy in other forms. Right. I mean, we run a clean kitchen, of course, here, and we always get high health food scores. But I'm personally not a tidy person. Okay. My wife would attest to that in a big way.
Well, I do know that you're going to be opening right now for lunch service here at Jujube any minute. So, Matt, do you have any closing statements?
Yeah, I just have one last question. We've heard so much about you, about wine, running back of the house. Or like, if you're opening up a new restaurant, and I know there might be some talks, please come. What are some of the other tenets you've already talked about? If you're making a list, make it as concise as possible within what you're trying to accomplish. We talked about if you're not selling dishes. What are some other basic tenets of restaurants and businesses that you open?
I think minimizing variables is every variable that you introduce is something that you can screw up. Somebody can screw up.
Right.
And so I think that by trying to by either again, it goes back to the menu once again. Like you don't have any dishes that you don't need to have. So there's one less dish that you can burn or you can go bad on you or whatever it might be. So we try and have the concept be fundamentally sound enough that everyone doesn't have to stand on their head to make it work. Mm-hmm. That because these days also, as a restaurant community grows, more and more restaurants open up, and it pulls on your labor pool. Like you don't, like when I was coming up, like back at Oliveto, for instance, like the amount of talent in the Oliveto kitchen was staggering. I was like the last guy in line, and yet I was like a total food enthusiast, and I was a prep cook when I started there. And yet I was on my days off, I was making mole from scratch and curry. I would grind it up in a mortar and pestle. Like that was the prep cook at Oliveto. Like I was 8th in line, and now you've got you don't have that at your prep cook is like there to make a buck. And if you're lucky, you find a good one who has a strong work ethic and follows directions and cares about what he does or she does. But they're not like food enthusiasts. Right. They're like just people. And so you need to. So the point is that if your whole notion is predicated on as long as everything is perfect, then we'll be okay. Then you're SOL. Yeah, exactly.
So, but just to further that point and sum it up, so saying like, if you're opening up a restaurant, make sure that you have enough talent to execute what you're trying to do. Yeah, because if that third cook is not that huge food enthusiast, well, make sure he or she can make a salad well.
Right, exactly, and make that salad well makeable.
Yeah,
makeable.
As my wife says, keep it simple, stupid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Charlie.
Thanks, guys.
This was a pleasure for all of us to come out here. Yeah. Matt, what would you have to say?
Well, I would say come out to Chapel Hill, eat at Jujube, go to Durham and Dos Perros and Juju, and eat and drink merrily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the NCF&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.